The rain had not ceased for 3 days. Dr. Alistair Finch sat alone in his cramped university office, listening to the persistent drumming against the window pane. The sound had become a metronome to his solitude, marking time in a life that had grown increasingly empty. Outside, Cambridge continued its centuries-old academic rhythms without him, the students and faculty flowing between Gothic buildings like blood through ancient veins. He ran a finger along the spines of the books lining his shelf. Medieval histories, archaeological surveys, treatises on forgotten religious orders, companions more faithful than any human connection he had managed to preserve. The gold letters of his own published work, Monastic Institutions of Medieval England, Their Rise and Decline, caught that little gray light filtered through the window. Once his pride, now it seemed to mock him. 6 years had passed since the incident, but the whispers still followed him through the university corridors. 6 years since his passionate defense of historical accuracy had led him to publicly challenge the methodologies and conclusions of Professor Edmund Harrington, the department chair and his former mentor. Absolute precision in historical research is not merely an academic virtue, but a moral imperative. He had declared during the Faithful Faculty Symposium, to romanticize or distort the past is to commit violence against truth itself. The subsequent investigation had revealed Harrington's decades of historical fabrications, subtle embellishments, and convenient omissions that had built his reputation. The scandal had destroyed the old man, who suffered a stroke 3 months later and died before the year's end. Alistair had been technically vindicated, but victory tasted of ash. His colleagues viewed him with a mixture of resentment and unease. The department's Judas, the destroyer of reputations. Invitations to conferences dwindled, then ceased. His classes were consistently under-enrolled. His funding applications were politely declined. More devastating was Catherine's departure. "I fell in love with your passion," she had said, packing the last of her belongings from her small cottage, "not your righteousness." He hadn't seen her since, though he had heard she'd married a literature professor from Edinburgh last spring. The antique clock on his desk chimed 4. Alistair rubbed his eyes, setting aside the student paper he had been attempting to grade for the past hour. At 42, he felt twice his age, weathered by isolation and regret. "Truth at all costs," he murmured to himself, an incantation that had once fortified, but now only hollowed. The knock at his door was so unexpected that he initially mistook it for a peculiarity of the rain's rhythm. When it came again, more insistent, he straightened in his chair and called out, "Enter." The woman who stepped into his office was striking not for any conventional beauty, but for her severe elegance. Silver-streaked black hair was pulled back from a face of sharp angles and penetrating dark eyes. Her charcoal suit seemed to absorb what little light existed in the room. "Dr. Finch," she said, her voice cultured and precise, "I am Eliza Blackwood, representing a client who prefers to remain anonymous for the moment." Alistair gestured to the chair opposite his desk, blatantly aware of the disarray of papers and books surrounding him. "Please sit. How may I help you, Miss Blackwood?" She settled into the chair with fluid grace, placing a sleek leather portfolio on her lap. "My client has followed your work with great interest, particularly your meticulous approach to historical documentation. They have a proposition that may be of significant interest to someone of your..." She paused, her eyes taking in the dusty confines of his office. "Scholarly dedication." "I'm listening," Alistair said, wariness mingling with curiosity. "Are you familiar with Crimson Abbey?" The name stirred something in his memory, a footnote in a larger work, perhaps, or a passing reference in local folklore. "Only vaguely. A medieval foundation in northern England, if I recall." "Precisely. In the North York moors, actually. The Abbey has been in my client's family for generations, though it has stood largely uninhabited for the past century. The structure itself dates back to the 13th century, with significant alterations during the Tudor period." She opened her portfolio and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the desk. The image showed a massive, brooding stone structure, partially reclaimed by nature. Gothic arches and towers rose against a backdrop of misty moorland. The stone itself seemed to absorb the gray light rather than reflect it. Even in a photograph, the Abbey possessed a quality of watchfulness, of patient malevolence. "My client wishes to commission a comprehensive historical documentation of Crimson Abbey, its founding, its occupants throughout the centuries, and its place in both local and national history. They believe much of its true story has been obscured or lost to time." She withdrew another document from her portfolio. "This would be a 6-month residency with all expenses covered and a substantial compensation package." She named a figure that made Alistair's breath catch. It was more than his annual university salary, enough to secure his financial independence for years to come. "Why me?" he asked, his scholar's skepticism asserting itself. "There are more prominent historians, researchers with greater resources and reputations." A smile touched her lips but failed to warm her eyes. "My client admires your unwavering commitment to historical truth, Dr. Finch, even when that commitment came at great personal cost." Her gaze flicked meaningfully around his sparse office. "They believe you alone possess the necessary combination of expertise, integrity, and, shall we say, lack of current entanglements." The last phrase stung, though she had delivered it without obvious malice. This offer is certainly generous, he said carefully, but I would need more information before I could consider accepting. Of course, she placed a sealed envelope on his desk. This contains the formal offer along with some preliminary materials about the Abbey. I would encourage you to review them at your leisure. She rose with the same liquid grace with which she had entered. One more thing, Dr. Finch. My client has specified that all research must be conducted on site. The Abbey holds extensive archives that have never been properly cataloged. They believe that only by immersing yourself in the environment can you truly understand its history. Alistair stood as well. On site for the entire 6 months? There is a caretaker who maintains the property, and the east wing has been modernized for basic comfort. All necessary arrangements would be made for your stay. She extended her card, heavy cream stock with only her name and a phone number embossed in black. Please contact me within the week with your decision. The position would commence at the beginning of next month. After she departed, Alistair stood motionless, staring at the photograph of Crimson Abbey. The rain continued its relentless percussion against the window. In the gathering dusk, he could almost imagine the Abbey's stone facade watching him, waiting, its centuries of silence pregnant with untold histories. He ran his finger over the envelope's wax seal, deep crimson, like old blood, impressed with an insignia he didn't recognize. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something beyond the dull routine of his diminished existence. Possibility, purpose, perhaps even redemption. With careful fingers, he broke the seal.